Hi, it's Lucy, and today is the best time of the year. Today we're going to talk about the worst books that I read in 2021. This year was another meh reading year for me, both quality-wise and quantity-wise, but we'll talk about that part in another video. This video is a combination of my most disappointing and actually worst books. Most disappointing just doesn't quite have as good of an SEO as worst, so that's what's in the title. I do a video like this every year. My only disclaimer, since this is the worst books of the year video, I focus on the negative aspects of these books, or the negative aspects that I found to be in these books. In this video, if you want more balanced reviews, you can definitely check out my Goodreads. I do have Goodreads reviews for pretty sure all of these books. And if I have a wrap up that any of these books were featured in, then you can check those out, because then I'll talk about the more positive aspects if there are any. Also, these are the worst books that I read in 2021, not new releases, although some of these are new releases. That's a coincidence. My cats are going crazy right now. I don't know what they're doing. These books are ranked from disappointing to actually bad. You're welcome. And there are timestamps down below for each of the books to, spoil the surprise, and if you want to skip ahead or whatever. Also, I'm interrupting myself just to say, please fill out my channel survey. It's in the description box. It's one of the first links. Asking various questions about my channel, your YouTube watching habits, your booktube watching habits. All the questions are optional, and the whole survey is anonymous. So please, please, please fill it out. It will be open until the end of January. Thank you so much. Back to the video. So without further ado, let's get into the worst books that I read in 2021. All Along You Were Blooming, Thoughts for Boundless Living by Morgan Harper Nichols. This is a collection of poetry by Morgan Harper Nichols, who apparently has a very popular Instagram. I believe she has like over 1 million followers on Instagram. And this collection is described as a striking collection of illustrated poetry and prose, inviting you to stumble into the sunlight and delight in the wild and boundless grace you've been given. So the reason this is on this list is honestly it was just boring to me. Full disclosure, I did receive a copy of this from Libro FM as an audiobook, and I think that might have been where it went wrong for me. I'm not sure if I just can't listen to poetry on audio, if it's not like narrative poetry maybe. I'm not sure, but yeah, I just found it to be boring. Usually for a poetry collection, I just try to find like a couple of poems that like get me or hit me, or I just enjoy especially, and there were none of those in here. That description does say that there are illustrations, so maybe if I had the physical copy I would have enjoyed those illustrations and maybe it would have done more for me, but just as I read it, I wasn't a big fan. I Bring You a Thor break. He's camera shy. Thor, look at the camera. No, that's my water. Okay, bye-bye. Next, we have The Taking of Jake Livingston. Also, full disclosure, I received this as an ARC. This is an ARC. This follows the titular character, Jake Livingston, who is one of the only black kids at his private school, and he's dealing with that, along with the fact that he's a medium who can see ghosts. Things escalate when he meets Sawyer, a troubled teen who killed 6 kids at his high school before taking his own life. So now, the ghost of him has come back, and he's decided he wants Jake's body. And so Jake has to figure out how to stop him while bodies start piling up in his neighborhood. This book was just not for me, unfortunately. I was excited to see a book following a black teen queer main character, and still excited to see that. Just didn't work for me. I just felt like this book ultimately was just too short for what it was trying to do. Like, I could just imagine if this had been like 200 more pages and more stuff had been fleshed out, I imagined I could have really enjoyed this, but as it was written, I just was disappointed. I thought the world building especially was really lackluster. The way it's written now, we know hardly anything about like Jake's medium powers or the ghosts that he encounters, or like the ghost powers. It's mentioned in like the real Goodreads synopsis that the things Sawyer is doing like goes against everything Jake knows about ghosts, and we don't even know what he knew about ghosts, so it's hard to really understand what rules he's breaking and everything, and it just would have been nice to know. There's also characters that I felt like could have been fleshed out more, could have been used more. At one point we meet a woman who seems to be like Jake's mentor in like the mediumness, but he never contacts her again after that first meeting, even though he's clearly dealing with something very wild and like he needs a lot of help with it. So I thought that was weird, and also, it seemed like this lady wasn't helping, since it seemed like anything Jake knew, he just figured out himself, and this lady was speaking like kind of cryptically, if I'm remembering correctly. Also, just like side characters that we're introduced to that do get more screen time, I felt like we could have gotten to know them better, and I felt like I didn't really understand their friendship with Jake, because these characters become friends slash Jake's love interest during the course of the book, and like he meets them both in this book and they basically become his best friends, but it just didn't feel like it was enough time for any of that to happen. The Other Black Girl by Zakiya Dalila Harris. This follows a 26-year-old editorial assistant who is tired of being the only Black employee at her publishing house. And so she gets really excited when a new Black woman starts working in the cubicle next to her. However, things take a turn when she starts getting these threatening notes that are warning her to leave her publishing house, and all signs are pointing to the new girl. And so our main character is trying to figure out what's going on, and she wants to get to the bottom of it. The biggest issue with this book is that it ended up being boring because the pacing of this was so slow. This is described as like a literary thriller. There's very little thrilling aspects to it. There's like little seeds dropped and you're wondering what's going on, but then it takes like 100 pages for it to even do anything, and I just spent the whole book waiting for something to happen. There were also chapters that were from points of view that weren't the main characters that I guess were supposed to add intrigue and like mystery, but they just served to slow down the already snail's pace pacing, so I wasn't a huge fan of them. And I also found them confusing because a lot of the time the character name wasn't at the top of them, so sometimes I didn't even know what character we were following. Also, by the time we finally get to like the big reveal at the end, I really didn't like the implication of that. I'm probably reading a little too far into it. I don't want to spoil this book, but if you want to know what it is, you can ask me in the comments down below. But just the mechanism that we learned was being used, I felt like was really weird, and I don't think it was saying a commentary, but it could be perceived that way. So I wasn't really a fan of that. And overall, this was just really disappointing. I really wanted to like it. If it had been less trying to be a thriller, then I think I could have enjoyed this more. Okay, Tucker's eating, sorry if you can hear him. Hurricane Summer by Asha Bromfield. This follows a teenager named Tilla when her and her younger sister are sent from Canada to Jamaica to spend the summer with her father, who has been pretty absent and spends half the year in Jamaica anyway, even though the rest of his family lives in Canada. This is supposed to deal with colorism, classism, young love, and the father-daughter dynamic, but it does so in a way that is trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. I was not expecting that based on the synopsis. I got an arc of this as well. So I was not expecting it to be so depressing. There is almost no levity in this book. So to me, it felt like trauma porn, and I just don't really enjoy books like that. I don't usually seek them out. I usually avoid them. Basically, Tilla meets a lot of her family in Jamaica for the first time, or the first time in a while, I don't quite remember. And the family kind of uses her as a punching bag for the whole story. And I feel like there's some kind of commentary there, but it's just really hard to get through because they treat her so terribly. But ultimately, the biggest problem that I had with the story was something that happened at the end, and it kind of made me go back and realize the other issues that I had with the story. And this is a big spoiler, but I do want to talk about it. So like I said at the beginning of this video, there are timestamps, so you can skip to the next book if you don't want to hear the spoiler. And I also have the timestamp on the screen if you don't want to hear the spoilers. So now's the time to leave. There is a dark-skinned character who's named Andre in this book, and like I said, this does deal with colorism, so he's basically treated as a dumping ground for all the other characters to shit on him, be mean to him, treat him like garbage because of the color of his skin. He's the darkest person there, so they treat him like the bottom of the totem pole. Even though he gets treated like garbage, he's super happy-go-lucky, nothing can get him down, and he's the only person that treats the main character Tilla with any kind of respect, really, and actually treats her nicely, and he's the only part of her time in Jamaica that she actually enjoys. And so we get to the end of the story and we find out that he died in an accident, which to me really reads like killing off your dark-skinned character for the lighter-skinned main character's character development. And I just really didn't like reading that. It was left a bad taste in my mouth. And I think any commentary the book was trying to make on colorism really flops when you consider that like trope, basically using darker people for like lighter skinned people's development, just really icks me out. So I don't know if that was the intention of the author. It probably wasn't, but just if you're writing a story that deals with colorism in that way, I think you should consider the implications of how you're treating characters of color, of certain skin tones. She's Too Pretty to Burn by Wendy. This follows a teenage girl who has a difficult home life and meets a girl who she ends up falling for, and they end up in a whirlwind of murders and stalking during a summer they'll never forget. So this is disappointing and also actually bad to me for reasons that I will now explain to you. The first mistake is that when I originally heard of this book, originally heard the synopsis, this was described as a retelling of The Picture of Dorian Gray, which it is not. That was a big selling point, but going into the story thinking it was a retelling and then figuring out while I'm reading it that it really wasn't, was really disappointing to me. I was just excited for that, so I feel like that was a mistake on the publisher's part to put that in the synopsis, because it's just not. And if you go into it expecting that it is a retelling of The Picture of Dorian Gray, you will then be like me and have to dedicate a whole section of a video to express your disappointment that it was not. In addition, everything about this is written in a ridiculous way. Every scenario that happens is utterly ridiculous. No part of this is realistic, but it's not unrealistic in a fun way. It's unrealistic in a way that's frustrating to read. The main character was pretty bland, and that would have been fine if the other two characters weren't literally fighting to the death over her. Like I mentioned in my version of the synopsis, her relationship with her mom is difficult, but the reason it's difficult is so weird and wild. It's not really explained why when we meet them, and then ultimately, or not ultimately, I'm pretty sure this is the first at least 30 pages, 50 pages maybe, her mom ends up kicking her out because she won't go on a photo shoot. What? And there's like evidence that her mom has done other continually ridiculous stuff, and then by the end of the book it's slipped in a one-liner the potential reason that her mom may have acted that way, which honestly did not make any sense. It did not make it any better. I would have preferred no explanation than the one we got. This features an FF romance, which I love to see, but this one was so toxic and unhealthy, and I just would have appreciated some acknowledgement of it. I get that teenagers aren't known for being the best at communicating their feelings, but I feel like since this is YA, not that it has to have a lesson, but it should be demonstrated that how they were acting was unhealthy, and there's no evidence in the story that anyone thought it was unhealthy, including the good mom in the story, the love interest mom. And it's just so wild and weird, and I really hated them as a couple because of how they were acting towards each other, so that was not a selling point for me either. And then the big mystery that starts to unfold with the murders and everything was just so convoluted, and the villain was really like mustache twirling. That was also not really enjoyable at all, so I'm just left with a book that I didn't really enjoy. Before we get to the last book, I do want to give an honorable mention to the Pretty Little Liars books that I read this year. I actually did read 5 of them this year because I read the Christmas novella. I do have vlogs for both of them. They, I feel like, are in a different category of like bad books to me because I'm reading them purposely knowing they're bad. All of these books that I read, I did not read knowing that I would dislike them. The Pretty Little Liars books, I didn't dislike them, but I knew that they would be bad to me. So special shout out to them. If you want detailed thoughts on them, I will link both reading vlogs from last year down below. But the last book on this list is Suicide Notes from Beautiful Girls by Lynn Weinngarten. This follows a girl whose former best friend dies by suicide, but our main character doesn't believe it. And so we follow her as she goes on the search for the truth. So that concept really sounded like an interesting thriller to me, but unfortunately, execution is lacking. I felt that the characters were annoying and not very well done, and the reveals were not really very revealing. The main character is this blank character who has no real opinions, personality, or anything, and she just goes with whatever the next person tells her. She's incredibly naive while somehow attempting to be a badass, even though you can clearly see through that. This is a slight spoiler. This book also involves another perspective who I didn't like. I didn't know we were gonna get that perspective, and I wish we hadn't, honestly. The second character's perspective was really horrible because that character was horrible, and I'm not saying every character has to be likable, but we should be able to like see their reasoning for why they're horrible or like why they're acting the way they are. And you would think that since this was an added extra perspective, it would be given to add to the story and like give us more backstory, but it doesn't really, not enough. I thought there would be like an examination of at least a toxic friendship between the main character and her friend who past, but it wasn't really like that. It like started but then gave up, it felt like. And the actual synopsis on the book makes it seem like there was a big event that made the main character and her best friend like stop being friends, when it really just seemed like they grew apart. The event that the synopsis seems to be referring to is not really big. Like, I finished the book and I was like, why did it say that? And I was like, oh, it must have been talking about that. Like, it was not that big of a reveal, big of an event. And then there's the ultimate ending, which I personally just found unsatisfying. So ultimately, I found the whole book unsatisfying, and that is the end of this video. Those are all the books that I have to talk to you all about. Those are my worst books of 2021. In the comments down below, let me know what was the worst book you read in 2021, and also leave me a thumbs down emoji in the comments. I'm doing all my 2021 videos, or like New Year videos, in January. I believe this is the first one. There's more coming. Subscribe and hit the notification bell if you want to be notified whenever those videos do come. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.